Dean Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly.
Why Pennsylvania should take its time counting votes. CNN.com, 2020, 11:04. Election night is over, but the election is not. And given the unexpectedly tight race, Pennsylvania's 20 electoral votes may be those that decide who wins the White House. To be sure, Biden still has a path to victory that doesn't involve Pennsylvania, but he could end up needing the state if he suffers reverses elsewhere. The key for Pennsylvania to have an orderly and complete vote count is for the state to take its time. And the key precedent that should show Pennsylvania that it may take its time is not Florida in 2000, but Hawaii in 1960. Even though Richard Nixon said it should not be a precedent, what he did in 1960 should be the model for this election in 2020. In 1960, Hawaii's vote was incredibly close. On the first count, Nixon had beaten John F. Kennedy by 141 votes. On November 28th, the acting governor certified a Republican slate of electors. They met on December 19th and cast their ballots for Nixon, but a recount showed that, in fact, Kennedy had won the popular vote by an even closer margin of 115 votes. That recount had been completed on December 30th, 11 days after the Republican electors from Hawaii had cast their votes for Nixon. 5 days later, the governor sent Congress a new certification of electors, this time naming the Democratic electors as the electors properly chosen by Hawaii's voters. That certification arrived in Congress on January 6th, the day that Congress was to count the electoral votes. When then, Vice President Nixon, who the Constitution had set as the custodian of the electoral votes, began to open all the certificates, as the Constitution directs him, and came to Hawaii in the list of states, he announced that there were 2 slates of electors from Hawaii, 1 Republican and 1 Democratic. This was not the first time that Congress had been sent multiple slates of electors from a single state. In 1876, because of fierce partisan conflict, a handful of states had each sent 2 slates of electors to Congress, triggering a constitutional crisis that could easily have triggered a second civil war. President Trump narrowly won Michigan in 2016, and both he and Joe Biden campaigned heavily in the battleground state in 2020. Images a brutal nail-biter. 11 years later, Congress enacted a statute to resolve such conflicts. In the election after the enactment of the Electoral Count Act of 1887, Oregon sent a second set of returns as a joke. This time, the second slate was discarded without any fear of civil war. The record does not indicate whether anyone laughed at the joke, but Hawaii is the only case since 1876 when a state with sincerity sent the votes of more than 1 slate of electors to Congress. And while the 3 votes from America's 50th state would ultimately not matter to the result, they could have, had the tight Illinois race, which Kennedy won by around 9,000 votes, gone for Nixon and shifted a few reluctant Democrats in the Dixiecrat South, Hawaii's votes could have flipped the result from Kennedy to Nixon. In the days leading up to January 6th, Nixon's team had tried hard to engineer such a result. But it was clear on the morning of the 6th that they had failed. Nixon accepted his fate and chose not to allow any congressional challenge of the second slate of Democratic electors from Hawaii, as he is recorded as saying, "In order not to delay the further count of the electoral vote here, the chair, without the intent of establishing a precedent, suggests that the Democratic electors named in the certificate of the governor of Hawaii, dated January 4, 1961, be considered as the lawful electors from the state of Hawaii." The puzzle here is this. The Constitution specifies that it is Congress that sets the day on which the electors must meet in their own state to cast their ballots. That day must be the same across the United States. The framers' design was meant to avoid any possible coordination by electors from different states. Modern communications technology was just one more innovation the framers never anticipated. So if the Hawaii Democratic slate was only certified on January 4th, how could they have voted more than 2 weeks earlier on December 19, 1960? The key, and this is the critical fact for 2020 as well, is that the Democratic slate had also met on December 19th and had also cast their ballots in the manner specified by the Constitution. When they voted, no one knew whether their votes would matter, but at least someone recognized that the only way their votes could matter was if they were cast on the day that Congress had set. History does not record who had that genius legal insight. After a record-breaking early voting turnout, Americans head to the polls on the last day to cast their vote for incumbent U.S. President Donald Trump or Democratic nominee Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. That insight shows what should happen this year on December 14th, 2020, when the electors are to meet to cast their ballots. On that day, assuming the final count of the popular votes has not yet been certified, both slates of Pennsylvania presidential electors should meet in Harrisburg. Both slates should cast their votes by ballot, and Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf should await the final resolution of the popular vote count before he certifies which slate should represent the state. So long as that certification happens before January 6th, there is nothing that should stop it from being counted by Congress. Some might worry that this can't be done because of the Electoral Count Act's safe harbor provision that was at the core of the fight in Bush versus Gore. Under this provision, Congress promises to count the votes of any slate of electors that has been certified at least 6 days before the Electoral colleges to vote, under laws that had been written prior to the election. Under the scenario we're describing here, Pennsylvania's slate would not achieve safe harbor status. But the critical bit that the Supreme Court seemed to miss in Bush versus Gore is that safe harbor is not the only path to a slate being counted. As Hawaii shows, if the state's governor has certified only one slate, the Electoral Count Act says that is the slate that Congress must count, regardless of when it was certified. Govars. Wolf should make these facts clear to Pennsylvanians and the nation now. He should not permit the frenzy of a safe harbor deadline, this year, December 8th, to wreck the possibility of an orderly count of Pennsylvania's votes. Wolf should declare that he will wait until there is a final certification, whenever that is. He should declare that he will assure that both slates of electors cast their votes on December 14, so that both slates may ultimately matter. It will then be up to Congress to do the right thing. And in an odd twist of fate, the right thing is to do precisely what Richard Nixon did. Count the slate certified by the governor on the basis of the final count of the votes by the people, after an orderly and careful count in the state has determined who, in fact, the people had chosen. As Justice Elena Kagan said in the close to her opinion in Chiefalo v. Washington, the presidential elector case decided in July, holding that states could direct electors to vote as the people had voted. Here, we the people rule. We'll see whether that's true.
Now, given the police state tactics of the Biden administration and the Democrat Party, now we get to Donald Trump. Remember the Durham report about Russia collusion? People should read it. He shot torpedoes into the side of the Department of Justice and FBI like no prosecutor's ever done in my lifetime. And I speak as a former chief of staff to the Attorney General of the United States. The corruption at the FBI, at the Department of Justice, remains. And it comes at the top. Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland is a very angry man who wanted to be on the Supreme Court. Now he's Attorney General. He's enormous power. And he's using it. Every decision made at the federal level affecting Donald Trump has to be approved by him and his radical left-wing Deputy Attorney General Monaco. But they're worse than Stalin. These are worse than Stalin trials. These are worse than communist show trials. Can you name one targeted victim, during the Stalin regime who was indicted in 4 different jurisdictions? Can you name one who was facing 91 charges? Can you name one who was facing almost 1,000 years in prison? No. This is worse. So why are they doing this? This is all coordinated, folks. All coordinated between the locals, the state, and the feds. All Democrat cities. That's why they're not bumping into each other when they make these announcements. More than that, they're coming seriatim, one after another. You have to plan those things. They don't just happen. They're trying not to interfere with each other, but they're dumping all the charges, making all the publicity, draining Trump of his resources, draining Trump of the ability to campaign for president of the United States, all in the last 5 months. And they want all their trials in the next 6 to 12 months. That's not coincidence. He's charged with crimes relating to election activity. He's charged with crimes relating to documents. He's charged with crimes relating to non-disclosure agreements. He's charged with crimes relating to campaign activity in one state. He was charged before with a phony impeachment where he turned out to be right. And they didn't even go through the normal due process such as it is that the House of Representatives has traditionally. Then he was charged again with another impeachment, and he was tried when he was in Mar-a-Lago. An impeachment that accused him of insurrection and sedition, for which he's never been charged, and he never did. Then we had the Mueller criminal investigation, where he had to give testimony, written answers, and there were thousands of subpoenas. His kids were all brought in. Hundreds and hundreds of witnesses and so forth. They had nothing, all intended to sabotage his presidency. That's a police state. And they're doing it to you. I just went through a whole long list of things, and they're doing it to you right now. Now, on top of that, look at this. They use a grand jury in Washington, D.C. to bring charges that are related to Florida. That violates, as I keep saying here, venue limitations in the Department of Justice manual for prosecutors. That is an abuse of power. What else? You're not supposed to bring actions that may have an impact on an election. That's another section of the Department of Justice regulations. Federal prosecutors and agents may never select the timing of any action, including investigative steps, criminal charges, or statements for the purpose of affecting any election, or for the purpose of giving an advantage or disadvantage to any candidate or political party. The only time they can do it is when it's approved by the Attorney General of the United States. What about attorney-client privilege? Have you ever had an attorney? Have you ever had somebody you're up against? And the person you're up against goes to a judge and says, you know, I think those two are colluding to commit a crime. And she holds a secret hearing. And she says, you know what, I think you're right. So your lawyer has to testify for the other side in a grand jury and provide all the written notes of your conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, why go through the motions of justice? Just hang the guy. You know how far back attorney-client privilege goes? 1577. English common law. That's English common law. But it goes back before that, too. Ancient Rome believed in attorney-client privilege. Modern-day America does not. So here are the charges for June 8th. Documents. What are they charging him with? Well, violations of the Espionage Act of 1917. That law was created by Woodrow Wilson to imprison 2,000 of his political opponents, as I've told you, including a presidential opponent, Eugene Debs. They rounded him up, they put him in prison so he could get through the election. What else? False statements. False statements? You can drive a truck through that allegation of false statements. What else? The Enron statutes. The Enron obstruction statutes were never intended to be applied to a president of the United States. Here's the crap indictment that all the legal analysts says, this is where the problem is, right here. Not if we're a republic with a true rule of law. That's crap. Then we have, here's another one. Here we have the January 6th case. And I've told you before, what did he do, Mr. Smith? 1871 Klan Act. What? The Enron Act. The guy loves the Enron Act on obstruction and a financial fraud statute. Look, right here. Oh, my God. Crap. Mr. Smith goes to Washington, and Mr. Smith blows up the place. Here we have Atlanta, Georgia, by Fannie Willis. Now, look at her indictment. I don't even know if she read the damn thing. You know what this is? 100 pages of bull. I could take one section out of here. Let me ask you a question. Are you allowed to challenge a campaign in open and challenge its legitimacy? According to her, no. So put RICO aside and every other charge aside. She just charged somebody with a felony under state law for exercising their federal First Amendment free speech right.
I know you got to love the jockey at home. Let me be the rider to the real man come. With me, baby, fly like a dog. I really don't care if you do. You got to lie to me, baby. You got to lie to me, baby. You got to lie to me, baby. Lie to me, baby, move on. You got to lie to me, baby.